I call to order the December 18, 2023 meeting of the Municipal Authority. We have just returned from the executive session of the litigation. Okay, to discuss litigation matters. At this point, I'll take a roll call. Steve Merkel.
Here.
Paul Montefiore.
Here.
Tom Greco is not here tonight, and Louis Rosenthal.
Here.
And Maria Kane here. Okay, at this time, we'll have a moment of silence. And I think in commemoration of the continued unrest in the Middle East. About that. And let's please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Everybody's had a chance to look at the agenda. Can I have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
I'll second that. Any other questions or comments? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right, at this point, we'll take any public comments on agenda items only. So if you saw something on the agenda. Okay, and I mean, is it okay if we take public comment now? I mean, I like to do that only because I hate to have you sit through everything and then have to come back and discuss. So if you come up to the podium and just state your name and address and then let us know what you're here for.
Please. Okay. Good evening. My name is John Ross. I own the house at 4252 Westchester Pike, and there was never a lateral put to that location. And I'm here tonight to request a lateral be put in. I've talked to Mr. Porter about it, and it's approximately 150 feet away from the main. And I wanted to come here personally and see if I could get an answer or.
And Mr. Porter is here as our engineer for the authority. Have you had a chance to look at this?
I had met Mr. Ross with Jeremiah McCombie, one of our inspectors out at the property. I reviewed our plans. I did have something sort of in my engineer's report to discuss and to advise the authority on. I did mention at the last authority meeting that they own several properties within Florida Park. They've committed to paying their tapping fee for the other properties. I directed them to hold off on paying the tapping fee for this particular one until we took some measurements. What I would suggest that we do is, as from a survey standpoint, is evaluate the elevation difference between where the terminal manhole is on Pomona Avenue and where their point of connection will be, and take a couple of measurements to determine whether a gravity lateral would be acceptable, and whether we have enough room from the along the Westchester Pike frontage to be able to extend a lateral to that point. I think Mr. Ross indicated that he would be willing to pay the portion of the cost from where we extend it to tie in his property, if the authority would pick up the cost of getting it to his property boundary. I think that's something that's fair and reasonable. We don't have a cost estimate or any design at this point, but we are looking into it. I think survey for that property may be scheduled for the next week to week and a half, depending on who's available for vacation.
So it sounds like to me, Mr. Ross, that we're still collecting information as far as what it would cost the authority in order to have the system available for you to connect. So we can't quite commit yet at this point.
And what the most cost-effective way would likely be for the Rosses and for the authority would be to have the Rosses engage a contractor that they're comfortable with to do the entire project. And then we just determine what the proportionate cost is that the authority would be responsible for, and the authority would pay that portion of it, and then the Rosses would pick up the other portion to complete their connection point.
But you still need to do the survey portion of this
Right.
before he
Yes,
gets to that point.
correct,
Okay?
yes.
Does that make sense to you?
Yeah.
Okay, so
Yeah.
I would think Mr. Porter will be in touch with you once they have
Mhm.
all of the information and can share that survey and plan with you. And then you can share it with your contractor and get the total cost and then share that back with Mr. Porter.
Yep.
And at that point, he'll come back to us and we will be in touch with an answer. All right. All right. Thanks for your time. All right. Who is next?
I'm Byard Anderson.
Just come up to only because we've got the YouTube and the recording and everything. So,
I'm Byard Anderson and I'm from 6 Boot Road. And basically I got a letter 63 days ago, I believe, from the township manager saying that I should, have a plan, an application and to hook up. My problem is I've gotten several options of hooking up, but I have to go completely around my house into a 15-foot trench. And apparently that's where the tap is, 15 feet deep. I also have an easement across the Porsche dealership property. And there's 2 optional routes I could take, which would be considerably simpler than the one I've got at the moment. And I talked to Dave Porter, and he said that it's possible that we could have a wide connection with the dealership and then a tap in to Westchester Pike, which would be a lot easier for me. And would, I think, satisfy the dealership because I will be digging up all kinds of territory. We would do this in conjunction. My problem is I called, I believe it was Denise, and I said, I'm not prepared to, submit the application, but I'm willing to bring over a check for the tap-in fee. And she said, no, you can't bring a check over until you have the application filled out, and it must have a contract attached to it. So at the moment, all I'm trying to do, A, is pay, or not pay and have it deferred so I don't get penalized. But B, get an extension so I can kind of unscramble what I might do as far as the Porsche dealership versus tapping into Boot Road.
well, let's just confirm, Dave.
So just to give you a little bit more background, when the sanitary sewer project was underway, Mr. Anderson had been in contact with our office, inquired about the possibility to connect into Westchester Pike through an easement. What I offered to Mr. Anderson was that you need to present proof that you have the easement, a plan or something of that nature, so that we can verify that you have rights to make that connection. The project timing was such that we were already under construction in Boot Road, so we do one tap per property. So it was either Boot Road or Westchester Pike. At that time, we put the connection point in Boot Road for his property. I think he worked through with the Porsche dealership and through his legal counsel to find that he did in fact have rights by easement for a utility access to Westchester Pike. Right now, there's no Y in the sanitary sewer main for his separate connection to Westchester Pike. There is a Y and a lateral stub that was constructed for what was now the old Porsche dealership building. His house is situated behind that building with frontage on Boot Road. Mr. Anderson asked if it would be possible to connect and share that lateral. I said, I don't necessarily have an issue with it, provided that they have to work out an agreement, have an easement recorded, and memorialize who's going to be responsible for operation and maintenance of that lateral And then any easement that's required to get into that from his property to that point of connection would be his responsibility to work out with the Porsche dealership. Otherwise, I have no issue with them sharing that lateral connection, so
Right.
long as it's from.
From an engineering standpoint, it's gonna work
Yes,
and not gonna cost us anymore.
Right.
Okay, so it sounds to me like you need to do some work with your attorney to get some kind of a mutual maintenance agreement regarding your easement. And utilizing this easement for the connection to the system. Am I right? And
correct.
okay,
Yeah, and as far as the tapping fee payment,
There's no reason we won't take that now.
yes.
I assumed.
Here's my card. If you-
I think she must have been confused that
Need to check it.
Yeah,
she may have thought it was the application fee or something else, but yeah.
so my feeling, yeah, I mean, Stephen Neese is, our operations manager for the municipal authority. And I think if you get in touch with him directly, and keep him apprised of what you're working on with your attorney, he'll make sure that our attorney, if we need to look at any kind of mutual maintenance agreement on the easement, that would do that, if that's part of the process typically, but, and I think, yes, please get your application in, and Stephen can tell you
come
what
in
to
and pay
note
the-
on it.
Come in and pay the tap fee.
Money, yes.
Yes, we'll hold off on the application until you get the easements taken care of.
Yes, okay.
And then we'll go from there and have you pay that fee at that time.
I've just begun talking to the Porsche dealership about this. And I talked to a guy named Joe Marshall, who is supposedly the VP of construction. He questioned whether we could even share with the Y connection. And he said he'd never heard of such a thing. And he was going to talk to Keith Lieberman. Okay. And Keith Lieberman apparently said he'd never heard of such a thing. But it seemed like he wants everybody, I guess, understood that it is okay to do that. They seemed open to doing it. That's as far as I know at the moment.
Okay.
But I will proceed with that and try to get this whole thing ironed out and get
Yeah,
it done.
it
And I'll
sounds
bring you a check.
Yeah, it
Thank
sounds like, yeah, a little bit of legal work on your part and working with their attorneys and get the
Yeah, I have the
application in
eas-
after the check.
I have the easement, so I'm not sure how much more attorney work I need to do, other.
Well, there's probably gonna be, you're gonna have to,
You're gonna need some sort of agreement that
Yes.
pertains to the maintenance of that sewer lateral.
Yeah,
because you're gonna be utilizing the easement to put in some type of a Y system, and then who's gonna maintain it afterwards? Whose
Right.
responsibility? is
If,
it?
and if that easement encompasses that other portion of where you're gonna make the connection, I'm presuming that easement was rights of access to Westchester Pike for utility for you,
yes,
but probably didn't include where their lateral stub is located. if that
correct,
makes sense,
yes,
right? So you may have some work to adjust or redefine that easement to include where you're gonna make the connection.
okay, yep,
So,
I get you, yeah,
okay,
okay, thank you.
Okay, anybody else? All right. Thank you, everyone. Moving on. Everybody's had a chance to review the minutes from our last meeting at November 2023. Can I have a motion to approve the minutes? Okay, thank you, Louis. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Thank you, Steve. Any questions or comments? All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Right at this point, we'll take a treasurer's report. Steve, are you going to be giving that or?
So in your packet, I think you will see a couple of quick things. One, we have exhausted the bond money. And so now everything is coming out of what I would call your reserves in order to finish for this project. As you can see, At the moment, we're anticipating somewhere around $1 million overage. Where I will tell you, based on some of the conversations that I think we'll have, there'll be some adjustment to that based on the jail and Bradley piece. And so we will get you an updated one after that. I would make also note, I skipped the page, just your bank balances and your book balances. You continue to have healthy balances, and we did just not too long ago made a payment for the bond, and so that did come out using most of prior year tap fees. There was a little bit from this year. I think it was about $1 million from this year and $1 million from last year is what we did.
And just getting back to the closeout of the bond fund.
Yep.
How do you plan on showing that roughly $1 million going forward as a separate line item netted against,
Yeah, I
reserve
think that
balances?
once we get a little bit more clarity on who
What
we
it
owe
is.
what, then we'll probably create a new line saying, here's where you are, and then we'll start working our way down.
Perfect.
Is kind of what my thoughts were. But I was hoping to have a little bit more clarity, and I think depending on what your actions are later tonight, might help us to get pretty close on that clarity and get us to where we need to be. I do believe you also had in your report, the Portnoy report, and then also a revenue and expenditures, and I'd be glad to answer any questions on those. The good news is, as similar to the township this year, we've been able to do some investing with the dollars and actually done pretty well with your interest earnings for the year. So we're up on both of those. Probably about additional $65,000 between SR2 and SR3. So that's good.
Can I back up on
Yeah.
the Portnoy piece?
Yes.
We have our largest receivable that Portnoy has now taken on. Do we have any
Yes.
updates on that?
I don't know any updates on that. Yvonne, do you have any update?
Yep.
So I'm just going to repeat what Yvonne said so that if there's
It's on
anybody
the microphone.
listening, there was no payments in November from Portnoy. It is included in there, but they've taken no action specifically on, they've not collected anything yet. I can't say.
I was thinking we would get a letter, not.
Yeah, I was expecting a letter too,
Yeah.
but we haven't gotten one.
I do have a question on Portnoy. Are we contractually, how long is that for?
With Portnoy?
Yeah.
I think they're engaged. in your question.
Year.
Yeah, I was
thought it
gonna
was
say
year.
it's-
Are we happy with that?
I don't know that we're unhappy with
Yeah,
them.
They
What
were
I would-
290 in October, they're 284 in November, and now they're 285.
Yeah,
It's slow.
yeah, I will say that it's not surprising to me when I look at the number that it was going to take time to get to where we are. It's going to take time to get this down just because. Go ahead.
I think the nature of that practice is it takes some time to get geared up. I mean, they're using sheriff sales and what we call writs of certiorari as a tool to leverage payments, and it takes time to get through the legal process that far. So, I would think when did we first send our
I
first?
think
tranche
about
of
a
payments?
year and 2 months ago.
Okay, I mean, I would think maybe 18 months, we'll start seeing more and more activity, I mean, they remember when they started up, the courts were still coming out of COVID. I have cases, land use cases, that have been sitting, at one for us, they've been sitting with the courts with no activity whatsoever for almost a year.
Okay.
I think they're sort of hamstrung by the backlog.
Okay.
So, I mean, that,
My experience with election agencies is different. I don't know the municipal side of it,
different
going through the
animal
courts
here,
or, but as long as there's performances and they're doing what they need to do, and we have an out if they don't, but.
Yeah.
That's found money.
Yeah, we have an out, and I'll tell you by my experience, there's nobody better or more aggressive than they are.
Oh, good to know.
For working with them in other municipalities. So I'd ask your indulgence. I think we'll do a good.
Great. Okay. Thank you.
And it is the first time that we've used an outside
Yeah.
organization.
So they're trying,
You
that's,
know, like, yeah, I mean, just as as the authority, we're trying to kind of adjust to this new process as well. And, you know, are we being timely
And the
and
thing to
getting them
remember,
everything they need? And
we have our leads, right? So,
yeah,
just, that's what we would be sitting with without them too. So we have that security that if someone transfers a property or anything like that, we're
we're
gonna
gonna
get paid.
get paid.
It's just getting the money sooner that's really there.
Yeah, that background's good to know. Then if you use them in other places, then they're
Yeah.
highly respected.
I've used them in other
Great.
places as well, so.
Thank you.
I will say this, we probably are going to be submitting to you in January a list to be submitted of the last year's worth of folks that have not kept up. And so that we will probably have a new list to go to them. I'll be working with Yvonne over the next month to get that for you.
Okay.
Any other questions?
And is that it for the treasurer's report?
That's
Steve?
all I have. Thank you.
Right, and Dave Porter from Macomb Engineering for the engineer's report.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a couple of quick updates on status of various things for the sanitary sewer project. One being the notices of terminations for the NPDES permits, which are earth disturbance related. They've been filed with the Delaware County Conservation District. Understand that Steve had signed the paperwork. They were picked up sometime last week. I believe they were submitted today. Connections are ongoing. We've received a lot of permit applications for Florida Park. There's one particular property of note other than Mr. and Mrs. Ross's property that is situated at 20 Park Avenue. It's the far northwesterly corner of Florida Park. The property has frontage on Westchester Pike. And that portion of Park Avenue is a paper street. As it turns out, their property has no frontage on Florida Avenue where we have the sanitary sewer main installed. There's no sanitary facilities in Westchester Pike. The dwelling is greater than 150 feet from the sanitary sewer. So in this particular case, they appear to meet the test for all of the criteria in the sanitary sewer ordinance as far as the exemption from the requirement to connect. So I did send an email to Mr. Immel, I believe it was Bob Immel at 20 Park Avenue to that effect. It was in response to a letter that I had received at our office, and I think that Leonard had received as well, Leonard Altieri, and the township had received. So I don't know that there's any other further action that the authority needs to take in that regard.
I don't think so. For whatever it's worth, I gotta look at that email and I agree with Dave's legal analysis. And between that and the Joe in negotiations, he might be the best lawyer in the room. I'm not sure.
Do we need to give him something in writing as a response from our?
Well, he's got
You, or-
the email from Dave. I think that Dave's email basically said that he discussed it with Steve and I, and if there was any need for further contact, we'd make it, but I don't think there is. I think Dave was right on point.
Okay.
Great, okay.
Continue to update our as-built plans with the information that J.O. and Bradley had provided with regard to locations and depths of lateral stubs. So we're in the process of making that change as well. And the larger item on the agenda for later, I'll save that for the board's action with regard to the final payment for J.O. and Bradley in the Camelot and Ashford service areas and closeout of that project. Unless there's any other questions on sewer project, I'll continue. I understand the PA Small Water and Sewer Grant. We've not Doesn't look like we're receiving any funding for that. We also submitted the local share account grant. And it doesn't appear that we're gonna receive any funding through that grant program either. It's been, over a year since we publicly bid the Westchester Pike Sewer Project. In discussion with Steve, it may be appropriate to rebid to see, what, if any, cost savings there might be relative to that project. We have the plan specifications. We could add in the Bryn Mawr Ave Westchester Pike crossing portion. If we wanted to add in the improvements related to French Road, we can do that as well. And if there's anything else related to any other small ancillary projects, we can roll that into a bid package as well. One being 126 Bryn Mawr Avenue. That's been something that's been kind of hanging out there. It was a sanitary sewer blockage that occurred a while back, a couple of years ago, I think. And there's a portion from the manhole that has either a disjoint, I think, in the pipe. So Jeremiah from our office met with Harry Robinson out to take a look at it, had a contractor go out and get some pricing for it. We're working on getting a couple of other prices so that we have 3 written quotes. The first one, I think, came in at about $18,440, and that's setting up bypass pumping, replacing damaged section of what's vitrified clay or terracotta pipe, the 10-inch diameter pipe with standard SDR 26 PVC, doing the couplings and backfill and everything. So that's where that's going to come in. The other one we're working on getting some price quotes for is the crane rebalancing. And I don't know if this board recalls, there's some valves that are buried in Route 252 that deal with the force main and diverting flow from the Ashford force main into the Ellis pump station, and then allow for that flow to be rerouted through Ellis and then back out through the Ashford force main. What needs to occur is a valve riser needs to be installed so that valve can be accessed without having to excavate. Obviously, the excavation will have to occur, so we're going to put an item into the bid package for that as well. With the authority's permission, we'll put that together.
So, well, we talked about this in the past, but of sort of the capital work that we need to do and some of the remedial work. So now it's that area on Westchester Pike,
Right,
coming up to Bryn Mawr Avenue. There are things that need to get done sooner than others, and maybe some nice to haves that you can sort of capture in on a contract. But
yes,
I think it will be helpful for us to begin that process of putting together a list of infrastructure items that we're going to need to do over time. I'm not saying that we wouldn't, I mean, I'm going to have to rely on the professionals in the room to come up with what goes in that bid package, but as a tool, especially on the funding side, we look down the road, that'll be a great tool for us to think about the kind of money we need to have on hand or set aside future spending.
I think it's also important to think about, do we want to consolidate projects and therefore throw us into the public bid prevailing wage situation? Or do we, do them, piece by piece like this? I mean, this obviously falling below.
I would
the
say piece
public
by
bid.
piece, because that's so close to piecemeal, and then I start to get itchy.
Yeah.
Mhm. We don't want,
Exactly.
we got to avoid piecemeal.
right.
And that's
I mean,
the
I
thing.
think
Is it so interconnected with the larger project on Westchester
Yeah,
Pike? Do we
This
want
piece
to?
would be a clear, complete and separate project in its own right. The authority, in my opinion, wouldn't have an issue with the appearance of avoiding a public bid unless we got other written quotes that fell within that threshold, requiring us to have a public
Right.
bid. Right now, 18,000 and change, we're below that threshold, we can get a couple of other written quotes, and the authority could theoretically pull the trigger on hiring the contractor and doing that based on those 3 quotes.
Well, I would recommend getting 2 more quotes on
Yep.
that, please,
We'll do.
and then report.
And we're
report
required to
back.
by law.
Yeah, yeah.
So, I mean,
Right.
and we're gonna do that.
Yep, we are.
I didn't know if he was saying, I got 1, I'm waiting on 2 more, or whatever.
we are.
Please proceed. Or Steve, maybe you were saying too, like, should I hold off on getting another 2 required by law in order to see whether or not we're gonna include it in the larger project?
I
and
think
therefore
that if
publicly bid?
we could get
So-
this particular one set and going, it would make sense to move separate on this one.
Okay,
For
And
what it is.
I think that was my main thought on all of this. If it makes sense to do it separately, and there's no
I
reason
think
to
you could-
combine it with a larger project, let's get the 3 bids and 3 quotes, and we'll proceed from there.
I think you could easily have 4 separate projects, I think, based on what we've been talking about.
Okay,
And so I think though, if we're gonna go out to bid, which we will have to for the one on Westchester Pike that's over in front of Charlotte's area.
yeah,
And if one of the others is pushing that number, there does become economy of scale if you try to put them together. However, they are very clearly 4
Unrelated.
different projects in 4 different locations. They're not even exactly the same work.
Right,
So,
exactly. And the way that I would handle it with the public bid, if we did end up including them, would be to include them as add alternates to the base bid of the Westchester Pike project. So that way the authority has the flexibility that if those smaller ancillary projects came in that were relatively high, you can say, no, thanks, we're not gonna require you to do that. We'll just, engage you for the base bid and proceed with that portion of the work.
okay.
Just the savings on staging.
right.
Sure. I think I've covered everything project wise. Something else that's kind of cropped up again, and this is related to the fat, oil and grease mitigation, or however we want to call it. The fog implementation or fog abatement in the township. We had a complaint at St. Albans Circle. It's for, Steve, help me with the name of the place. I know it was the PA nursing.
I don't remember the
I know
exact.
there's a couple of tenants in that building that have experienced issues with their sanitary lateral blocking or becoming blocked, or the flow being very slow from that lateral because of grease buildup in the sanitary sewer main in St. Albans. Andy Retchek, the director of codes, building code official, and myself had gone out to Luigi and Giovanni's catering, 36, I think it's 3601 Chapel. We did an inspection of their interior grease traps back in 2022. At the time that we made that site visit, we advised them, here's a notice of violation letter, here's the ordinance, this is what you need to comply with as far as reporting. So they provided backup reports from 2022 prior to that. I don't believe to date we've received any additional maintenance records for their grease trap cleaning and maintenance. This continues to be an issue in the sanitary sewer main. I know RHM has assisted us in cleaning the line more than once. This past occurrence, we had KBX come out and jet the line to clear it, to make sure that those other folks had free drainage. And Andy and his group issued another letter back in November, I think it's November 28th, requiring them to provide their maintenance records by December 15th, which they've not done. And because of that, Andy's group has filed citations in district court in violation of those ordinances. So I did speak with the property owners at the nursing, the PA nursing facility. Who's the woman's mother owns the building, and the tenants that are below are the ones that are having the issue. So she's aware that the authority and the township are taking additional enforcement action. Although because of, I guess, I found out the information later in the day today about the citations. I haven't updated her about that yet, but I did update her last week about the additional action that we're pursuing here. So it's a problem.
So, I mean, I don't want to belabor this discussion, but what kind of recourse do we have and or the township?
They could put some kind of.
The
thing
notice
out.
that we sent out now will play, I mean, it's a citation that'll go to district court. You know, I think that if they continue to ignore us, you know, potentially we could come in and, you know, depending on how far it goes, maybe even go as far as threatening to shut down. We'd have to look at that a little closer, but I mean, there's an expectation they have to do certain things. But most of it's a fine process. But I think we could argue health and safety if they don't do something, because we keep having backup in the neighbors.
And when we've gone out and done work or when RHM has come in to clean it out, and KVX, who pays for that?
So it's the town, it's the authority pays for that as part of their piece. I mean, we could bill back to them specifically.
Well, yeah, I don't think the rate, my opinion is I don't think the ratepayers should be taking care of somebody who's not following the ordinance.
And I think that'll be our argument when we go to court. And I mean, it's pretty set though. It says, here's what you can fine, how much per day. We could argue that the value needs to be higher to cover what we're experiencing.
Okay, continue to keep us apprised of that.
Thank you.
Thank
Will
you.
do. Aside from the Jalen Bradley issue, which I think is coming up in the agenda, that concludes my engineer's report for the evening.
All right, and then moving on to operation manager's report. Anything else, Steve?
I have two things that I'm going to
Okay.
cover. One, just make sure you have had a chance to see that KBX was out, did their quarterly. You can also see, that there was a new controller for the Muffin Monster in two of our locations. I believe it's Camelot and Goshen. And then they were a part of evaluating and a part of the old Masters pump station getting up and operational, and they're working there. Everything else has been pretty much routine maintenance other than just the cleaning of the wells. They still have some comments of dioxide and some things like that. We're working through those. So that's what those are. So
Steve, sorry to interrupt. I do have one other thing from Evoqua, who is the dioxide purveyor. They need a little bit of information from the township as far as the tax exempt status, the bill to address, and then just shipping locations for the pump stations, which I'll provide to them. But I'll forward you a copy of the email. That's a hard copy. That's just to get the authority set up in the system. And then once they're set up in the system, we'll get regular deliveries. And then they'll provide for us the cost quote for the additional services, the O&M services if KBX can't perform that, and then the remote monitoring for the dioxide level.
So just for clarifications, it'll actually be the authority's tax exempt that I give them based on who this is for. So
Gotcha.
I know they're asking from the township, but we'll give them the authorities. All right, so that's what I have related to KBX, unless anyone has any questions. I wanted to do a relatively short, but hopefully thorough enough presentation of where we are in putting the 2024 budget together. If you would go ahead and pull that up, please. We've been working on the 2024 budget. This presentation, if you look at it, it might seem a little small on the PowerPoint, but I'm going to kind of cover really most of the information I think falls in the last page of the PowerPoint, so you know where we are. just a reminder, you have a couple basic areas in your budget. You have, some for revenues, you have your interest, which is probably the most least controlled by us in a way, right? And then you have your rents, you have penalty, you have billings for infrastructure and debt service. And then there's a couple other kind of things that fall under there, some source certs and other things. Most of those are small. Your big number really falls within your rents with people. And when we say rents, that's what people pay for their usage, and whether they pay on time determines whether or not they have a penalty or not. There's no discount like there is for taxes. We don't offer that in where they are, but in this. So for 2024, we're looking at somewhere around 3.4 million in sewer utility collections for usage. The other big area that we're anticipating, if I say we're anticipating 2 areas of collection, infrastructure fee looks like it's going to be about 4.25, 4.3, 436,000 basically, and then tap-in fees are about 695. We are going to need to transfer back over from capital, from the tap-in fees from prior years to help pay off the debt, which we had intended to do as we were building up the amount for the debt service fee. This is all in line with what we said we were going to be doing. And so, and just a reminder, with this in this budget, we have built in the amount that we are collecting this year in the debt service fee actually doubles and going into 2025 or 24. And then that same amount, it goes up for the next 4 years after, or 3 years after that. So for 5 years, we've implemented this fee to get us up to the number that we feel we need to be at to be able to have enough money to pay the debt service fee each year that we have. Again, on the infrastructure fee, that's going up $20 per unit per EDU a year over the next 5 years. Again, with the idea that we get up to an amount that will allow us to do some of these projects that Dave just mentioned, so that you have a continual reserve to go to be able to do that, because you're kind of at your max on borrowing right at the moment. And so we need to get that debt down and get these and keep moving and keep the system operating across the township. And so that's what we're looking at. And then finally, that kind of gives you a number. If you add all of those things up and the small little numbers that are kind of in there as well, it gives you about 6.6 million, 6.7 million that you have as revenue. Under your expenses, they kind of vary. We have some administrative expenses. You have some basic operating expenses. Your 2 big areas that typically kind of jump out at me is that administrative / what you pay the township in monies. And so you give money for both public works team to do work as well as for township staff. And then you also have a pretty good size amount in pump station maintenance, because we kept adding the pump stations. But the real big cost, if we put it, is the cost that we pay for municipal treatment charges. Remember, I know you all know this, but for those who are watching, the authority is not a treatment. We don't do treatment here. We do a conveyance, and we convey. And Delcora, who, if you've probably heard of, if you've been watching the news at all in the last 3 years, they're the ones that actually do the processing, the treatment, and disposal of the waste in that way. And so that's the big numbers, other than your debt service. And over the next, probably, I think if I remember right, about 26 years, we have about $2 million every year for debt service that we'll be taking on and taking care of. So those are the expenses that you have. There's obviously you pay your solicitor, you pay all of those, but most of those are smaller. expenses and your engineering fees. So with that in mind, on this last slide, you will see that in 2024, we can do that and still keep a positive balance, other than I would say without any increases, but we are increasing debt service and we are increasing infrastructure fee. We're just not increasing the actual usage fee. But you can see that as we look into the next several years, that number changes and the costs start going up and they kind of start getting bigger pretty quickly, going up about 100,000. And so one of the things you may want to consider is that, do we want to get SR2 and SR3 on the same level? We had talked about that last year. And does that help us get maybe a little bit further down before we're having to do another rate increase? Or do we go ahead and wait? And that's a decision that I think you all need to think about. But that's kind of where we are. Again, the estimated numbers for 25 through 28, I used about a 3% cost of living so that you know how I got those numbers. It is, in fairness, it's an estimate, it's a guess, you know, it's nothing. I don't have anything concrete. Those numbers will probably change. You know, I actually, from last year to this year, those numbers changed. They actually, I thought we were going to have 4 years of actually being in the positive. That changed already. So we'll see how that goes. I think it's a reasonable guess to where we're heading. I'll answer any questions that you have.
Couple of comments. First of all, thank you for this, because it was, and especially the out years. And I figured it was 3% using my handheld calculator to calculate that out. I think as a tool, you mentioned the two big categories. It's an interesting budget. Expenses are usually controllable by those who set budgets. In our case, 2/3 of what we pay out come from other people, and we don't have any say so. First of which is obviously, as you said, the debt service, that's cast in stone, and that gets paid no matter what.
Yep.
And the charges we get from RHM and CDCA are sort of that's the cost of dinner, if you will. It would be helpful, I think, maybe as a tool to sort of break some of those out, because as we sit here as a budget approving body, 2/3 of it we don't have any control over. We have to say yes. And so for us to maybe focus on the things that we can influence and set a direction. We talked a little bit about setting aside money for infrastructure improvements and keeping the system healthy, as well as the new position that we talked about and things like that, just as a sort of a management device to help us with that. If you get into the details, you see it, you could do it yourself, but I think for us that might be helpful. And especially when you get into this on your total page, when you see the net at the end of each projected year and the years it goes negative, it allows us to actually focus again on actions we can take to make sure that that doesn't go negative.
Yeah.
You know, so while we can make 2024 without doing anything a la usage charge, we still might want to do something with usage charge, and I just offer that up. I don't think we're going to approve anything tonight, but you know, if you looked at controllable expenses, you know, we want to have greater administrative support. Those things will cost money. So anyhow, those are some comments. I think this is very helpful. Thank you.
You reminded me about one thing that I had not really mentioned when I did your presentation here. You as a board had given me direction at the last meeting to go ahead and put into the budget a potential person being hired. We have an agreement with the township that the municipal authority will hire through the township for work being done by the municipal authority. And so I did put that in the township's budget. I've also put the cost in your budget. However, it's not 100%. And if I could take just a moment to kind of explain that again, I think that you all may have an understanding, but I want to make sure that anybody who's watching has an understanding. And I did explain this at the township meeting, but wanted to explain it at your meeting as well. So I anticipate that hiring this position would cost somewhere around about $130,000, $128,000, $130,000. The direct cost to the authority is about $85,000. And you may say, why is a position that's 100% dedicated to the authority not costing 100%, $130,000? And so the best way to explain it is understanding that currently the authority is contributing monies to the township for work that is being done. There's work that I do for you. There's work that Yvonne does for you. There's work that George does for you on a regular basis. There's administration folks in the office who are doing things. You have one person who's pretty much dedicated about 75% of her time. Denise at the front, she kind of is at the front counter. Most of her time is spent doing billings for the township or for the authority. And then she collects the monies that come in. She does some reporting back to Yvonne from those side of it, from that utility billing side that's yours. There are times she's at the front counter helping out the township. So we bill 30% of her time to you. The remaining part of that is billed to the township. But then there's the position that used to be Steve's. We have a temporary person in there now. So that person gives you about 15 hours a week. And we went through and I looked at all the hours and I said, if we hire this position, you're still going to have the 30 from the person that's doing the billing. That's not going to change. You're still going to have one of our finance folks who does our checks. They're going to be doing all of that work for you. But you'll probably use a little less of Yvonne. You'll use a little less of George. The other administration person wouldn't be doing any work for the town or for you. They'd be having those hours to get back to the township. So that extra amount of money of about $50,000, it's 40,000 something. That amount of money is actually being sucked back into the township's expenses, but they're also getting those additional hours for the work of the township. So as we hire that position. So your budget shows an $85,000 increase, but it's not 100% of what the cost is for that position. And I just wanted to be clear on that.
So just in terms of procedure, this has to be advertised.
I do not think so. We've looked at that.
Okay, so I might offer a suggestion, Maria, that maybe we can come back with two options next time. You've got a 2024 proposed, which I think is good, but with my sort of suggestion about just purely looking at operating, might we think that we do a small increase on the usage charge? In fact, the usage charge should be what we think is coming from the two conveyors we passed to, RHM and CDCA, plus an allocation of our operations charges. So
Okay.
things like that. And if we just looked at that, 86, the debt service and some of the big capital projects we're doing, and just focus on those things, see if we were just approving that budget, if we're at break even or not.
Okay.
And I would take your recommendations for the authority.
So I did just also want to clarify that. So if I found that the operating part was maybe operating at a deficit by itself, then I would show the need to do the increase. If not, I may still not, I may show it just so you could see what the impact would be, or do you not want to see that unless it's there? I just want to make sure.
Oh, for me, I would love to
See it both ways.
And,
Okay.
and then the authority board can decide what it wants to do.
Okay.
But okay.
I mean, I would like to absorb this information
Sure,
a little bit
yeah.
and maybe, invite anybody on the board to ask questions as well.
Here's what I always recommend, to you. One, all your deliberation has to happen here. But if you have questions between now and next month when you meet, feel free to reach out to me directly. I will do my best to answer your questions. And, if I think there's a benefit to the entire board to answer that question, I would send it out to the entire board as an informational piece only. And I would do that. But feel free to do that because I know there's a lot here. And you may have more questions, now that I've presented and go, oh, why is this like this? Or why is that like that? I'm more than happy to answer those questions.
My central concern is, making sure that we're operating, in a, economically, reasonable manner and that we're making projections in order to keep us operating, the way we should, but I don't want to move too quickly to, increasing rates any further than we already have. It's been a lot for people and I just want to take some time to absorb this, to the extent, we still have to work on this agreement between the township and the authority. Even that, in comparison to the rest of the fixed costs that we're subjected to, we don't have a lot of wiggle room. So, yeah, if we want to even up between the two systems, whether or not we do it next year, the year after, we can look at that. But I want to make sure that if we're increasing rates, it's for, it's absolutely necessary.
So so what I plan on doing is I will come with 2 budget kind of presentations and 2 fee schedules accordingly. And then you can choose accordingly on that.
Yeah.
The question, are the year-to-date 2023 revenue and expenses, are they current through November?
I believe they were updated through November. I will say most of them were. We may have a couple things that came in towards the end of that, and then I didn't get those picked up because I had pulled this together a little bit before the very end of November. And I don't recall going back and updating it again, but I will, for your view in January, I will have the latest update for you. I do think there's some expenses that haven't come through, which is not uncommon. Yeah.
Right.
Like I know that we haven't done the billing back from the township side for the work that's been done.
Okay.
Well, I really appreciate the report.
Yeah,
I think
it's
it's
great.
very helpful. And again, we'll absorb it and come up with any questions in the meantime before the next meeting. Okay. If that's it, Steve, for that, we will move on.
Yep.
All right. Consider approving the bills on check register A dated December 18, 2023, totaling $69,879.35. Do I hear a motion? Thank you. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Thank you, Steve. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right. Aye. Next, moving on to 10.1, consider approving a refund in the amount of $847.45 to Jung J Kim at 1542 Kellogg Drive, Ambler, PA. The customer is requesting a refund in the amount of that stated amount. That was made online and intended to pay his taxes. I guess the person lives in Ambler, but
They have a property here in the township,
they have a property here.
and I
right?
believe it's a rental property. And
Do we have,
you-
but we don't have that address.
I'm sure we do. I think we picked up where he lives, not where he was being billed.
Right.
I don't have it right in front of me, but we can find that for you.
Okay.
But what
All
I
right,
will say, that
presuming that all makes sense, that it's a, Newtown Township property. And the person's entitled to that,
Actually, both of those, both the first one and the
first one
second
and the
one
second one.
are both the same thing.
Yeah, so again, it's 109 Walnut Street, is that?
That's in the township. That's
That's
a
in the
township
township.
address.
Okay. Okay. I could reword the motion and combine the two
You
of them
could.
if you want. Okay, so I'm going to retract that motion and make another motion to refund to Jung J Kim $847.45 and $1,156.12 to John Zampitella based on payment to the municipal authority in error as they both thought that they were paying their taxes. Do I hear a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, any questions or comments? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, so that's 10.1 and 10.2. All right, next, consider approving a refund in the amount of $166.98 to Rosemary Kennedy at 709 Wisteria Road. The customer is requesting a refund in that amount, as this was a duplicate sewer payment. Do I hear a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Any questions or comments? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right, moving on to new business. We'll lay it out here and then Mr. Porter may have some comments on this one. Consider approving payments to JOAO and Bradley Construction Company for work that was done for the 537 Public Sewer Project as discussed between the township engineer Dave Porter and JOAO and Bradley Construction. Checks processed as follows: a payment in the amount of $72,000 for work done at the Ashford service area. A separate payment in the amount of $148,619.18 for work done at the Camelot service area. I present this motion as authority to pay those amounts subject to a final release as reviewed by our solicitor. Do I hear a motion? I'll make the motion. Do I hear a second?
Second.
All right, any questions or comments at this stage? I'd ask Mr. Porter to give us some background on this.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just for clarity purposes, the amount requested for payment includes about $100,000 of retainage that was held on the Camelot contract in anticipation of closing out this project. So recall that J.O. and Bradley had sent a memo to the authority requesting payment for certain items, a couple of which included mobilization and demobilization costs related to the authority either having or not having certain easements acquired along the route of construction, which caused certain delays, and based on the amount of mobilization costs that J.O. and Bradley was seeking as compensation, our office looked at several different resources and disagreed with that initial cost. J.O. and Bradley was asking for about $18,000 per mob and demob. Our office felt it was somewhere around $7,000 for mob and demob, and it, of course, it's driven by the amount of equipment that has to be moved, how far they have to move the equipment, where they're sourcing it from, where their yard is, where they're getting their equipment. So as a compromise, I looked at the median between those two values and looked at the hours of delay, and that resulted in an additional $80,000 total between the Ashford and the Camelot contracts. The other aspect was the PA1 call, utility failure to mark or mismark locations, and the impact to the construction efficiency. They were looking at per crew hour, it was costing around $1,800. So looking at 1/3 of the total amount of delay hours they were requesting, that fell around $40,000. So it was about 21 hours of delay cost. So that was an additional $120,000 that they requested that we look at. I thought that was reasonable in an effort to close out the project, and made it clear to Julio Isidoro, who is their vice president of construction there, that, you know, this would be contingent upon, if the authority agreed, it would be contingent upon them executing an agreement, a final release agreement that would be drafted by our solicitor and work with their legal counsel to complete.
So in a sense, it's the 100,000, we already have that, am I right?
The 100,000 was already work that was completed, that we held 10% of that completed work just as leverage in order to get this portion closed out. That was money that they were absolutely 100% owed. The 120,000 on top of that is a compromise in order to get the project closed out and settled, and authority and contractor can move on.
Right, so these amounts would be in addition to that 100,000
Correct.
retaining.
Yes.
Okay, just
Mhm.
wanted to make that.
Yes.
Okay. All right, if everybody's ready, all those in
I
favor?
would just ask the solicitor, I mean, given the fact that there was various claims, valid or otherwise, and what we have come up with here. Thoughts on this?
I think Dave did a nice job with it. I think, you know, your litigation costs on this, because of the detail we would have had to go into to present that case, would have been pretty high, I think. The number of people we probably would have had to depose during discovery. And I think this is a fair settlement.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All right, so.
I just want to be clear, when the agreement's complete, and whatever time that takes, and gets signed, we're gonna be ready to cut those checks. They'll most likely be out of cycle. But you're authorizing us to issue those checks. That's just, I know you guys have already voted, but I want to be clear, that's what you're authorizing, and
I
so.
think that's what I said.
It said right in there, that's what it said, but I want to make sure that you know and the public knows we will do that, and so that's clear.
Yeah, so as long as the release gets signed, as
Right.
drafted and approved by our solicitor. Okay, thank you. All right, and possible action on the 2024 budget. I think we've discussed this, and that will be tabled for the next meeting. Okay. All right, with that, I adjourn the meeting.